Welcome back to the 22nd session. And first, I need to apologize for the background noise. What you hear is actually my air conditioner outdoor unit is running, which is right next to this window. My apology. I guess that just comes with life. Nothing I can do to control unless I'm ready and willing to sweat. Excuse me. So anyway, in the last session, we mentioned the Chinese theater and its function for edification to promote the Chinese values, the core values among the Chinese illiterate. And also, I think in this session, I do want to mention that, there, of course, a variety of different interpretation and translations of the Dao De Jing, including the second six characters in the opening sentence of the book. So other than what I offered as my own personal interpretation and translation of that six Chinese characters, I do want to mention at least there's one, of course many, but there's this one that I believe it actually makes sense on its own, except for I don't believe it covers the full range or scope. This is basically to take the six Chinese characters of Ming, Ke, Ming, Fei, Chang, Ming into, I guess, the direct and literal translation about the fame and reputation, because Ming, the Chinese character, actually does have at least one meaning of fame, reputation. So going along that line, the translation would be all the fames over a specific scope or realm will not last long. So, like I said, I believe it actually is one of the meanings covered in the scope. Whether or not it should just stand out there, stand alone by itself, I guess that's up for discussion. But I do recognize that personally, that it is valid as one of the meanings of the six Chinese characters. And here I'm going to give some analogy for that. Since I did mention about the Chinese theaters or the classical Chinese theaters and how it was functioning to edify the Chinese core values, in this session I want to talk about two Chinese playwrights, and they were very, very famous in their own times, probably recognized even today in the Chinese theater history as the best playwrights. One of them, excuse me, I don't know what happened. I apologize for that. One of them was the last name, Ruan, actually came as a direct descendant of one of the most famous seven, I guess, men of integrity, traced back to Wei and Jin period. If you remember, in one of the earlier sessions, I mentioned about the two of those great Chinese intellectuals had their argument over the music theories. And one of them was Ruan Ji, and Ruan was the last name. So this playwright also has the same last name or the family name, but it was not just so happened in a coincidence. He was actually the direct descendant of that great man of integrity. So between that ancestor, almost all the way straight to him, at the end of Ming Empire, the family had many many generations of Chinese gentlemen, came through the 3 levels of royal court official credential exams. So this was actually pretty, I guess, rare, because a lot of time, after 3 or 4 generations, you don't always have the man or the heir, the heir that actually possess the talents and always prevail from all the 3 levels of exams. They may drop on the way, probably on the level 1 or level 2. So anyway, in this household or family, generations after generations, they came through and remain as Chinese gentlemen in the status. Like I said, it was pretty rare, but he was born and raised in a household like that. And he did come through and prevailed from the last or the final level exam. And he was young, and this was at the end of Ming Empire, where and when the credentialed royal court officials took a backseat. The empire was driven and managed actually by a bunch of royal domestic staff. So obviously, if you spend almost a lifetime and earn your credential, but you're put on the back burner or the backseat, and watching somebody else driving and steer the entire direction, making all the strategic and tactic decisions for the empire, for the royal court. You can imagine that political struggle, the power struggle. So our young friend was the perfect family background, and supposedly came along was the upbringing. He started his career betting on the side of his own kind, which is basically a whole bunch of credentialed royal court officials in a political group later labeled as Donglin or Eastwood, sort of a party line. In Chinese royal court politics, any partisan activities were considered not healthy and was even illegal. But nevertheless, the two, parties, not necessarily like in contemporary politics, like the political party, but it was two rivalry with totally different political concepts. So anyway, our young friend didn't take him long, and proved to be proven as a sold out, totally just surrendered himself to the opposing party. Being a credentialed royal court official, he joined the camp of the non-credentialed court officials, and he actually became the godson through his own arrangement of the head of the other camp. Unfortunately, he I guess bet on the wrong horse, as the last emperor of the Ming Empire decided to have to clear the house and to throw the uncredentialed officials out of the royal court and put them back where they belong, which is basically domestic staff do the domestic things for the royal family affair. So when the winning side eventually prevailed, it was pretty clear our young friend was on the wrong side, and of course they denounced him, and the royal court basically ended his political career at the royal court, and he became a, I guess, commoner, and moved back to the South capital, which is known as Nanjing today. And it was the center of the ancient Chinese economic center. And so basically, with all the time at hand and all his talents, and he could not continue to contribute to the royal court of the Ming Empire. So he, I guess, made a good use of his other talents, not the political talent, but as a playwright. The classical Chinese theater basically was divided into the northern style and also the specific styles in the south of China, where became very popular. The one in the south, they basically stay with strictly with the format. A lot of them pretty much originated from the Chinese poetry, in which each format actually has very specific melodies. So if you title your, I guess, created piece either for poetry or use it for your playwright, you play script, the music's automatically there. So for those who are the playwrights, create the new plays, new productions, pretty much for the Chinese elite. They primarily focus on showing the beauty of the classical Chinese literature. So when you read through those, you can call it lyrics or the lines, you see them very poetic, right? So that's basically one. It was pretty much in the south of China, and two, it was strictly for the Chinese elite only. As versus the ones from the north of China, it was more for the, I guess, different kind of groups that may or may not be the ethnic Han, because as I mentioned before, in northern China, especially around Beijing, a lot of the Chinese population was pretty much mixed with the non-Han ethnic bloodline. Since the I guess the non-Han ethnic groups kept coming into Beijing and became the ruler of the regional kingdom or empire. So even the dialects in north part of China pretty much reflected the influence from the non-Han ethnic groups, came from the highland or grassland in the north, or deserts in the north. And all that, not just the linguistic influence, but also the impact on the local folklore, if you will. So the Chinese theater from the north part of China actually focused more on the music change, other than displaying the beauty of the classical Chinese literature. So you can see the difference between the two. And the I guess the project I'm working on, I mentioned a little earlier, for a opera play script, actually used the two historical figures that actually all the stories almost, I would say probably 95% were true, historically true. But I used these two characters and I lined them up, even though they never in real life, they never met, but I created the space, the virtual space for them to actually meet uh, to I guess to make some points, because one of them, which was Ron, I just talked about, came from the background of Chinese elite. Basically, generations and generations always have been in the circle of Chinese gentlemen. But because of the fact he proved himself as a man of no principles, so he was despised by all the fellow Chinese gentlemen who pretty much just took it as a shame that this one could be a fellow Chinese gentleman. So they all rejected him. So when he moved back to the South capital, over 100, I don't remember, 130 or 140 younger Chinese elites, they put their name, they all become, at least this 100 some younger Chinese elite became the signatories of an open letter to expel our friend Ron from the South capital. They kicked him out of his very nice secondary residence, and he had to resettle himself, in an outskirt area away from the South capital. So he came from that background and was already a member of that Chinese elite circle, but he was, kicked out. And then the other one, which is Li actually passed through the first level exam, but he did not pursue any further. And it happened a lot because one, most people did not have the money to continue, and two, it could take decades before you eventually prevail. And he was not born in a household with that kind of privilege and did not have the financial resource, so he dropped. He was a dropout. So nevertheless, he was, I guess, in an awkward social standing, kind of caught in between the commoners and the Chinese gentleman. He was neither. Of course, it would be a dream come true if he eventually could re-establish himself. And that was a part of his life story. So he was in his own village, and he was managing, well, as an average farmer. Had a good, I guess, decent life, until there was this lawsuit. He got himself involved, and then eventually he lost the lawsuit, and he couldn't stay, so he moved away, drifted into a bigger city in the area called Hangzhou, which is still today is a very good sized city. And he did a lot of different things in Hangzhou, but among other things, he did open up a business of a printing shop. And this was because he was doing another lawsuit, because he was already getting recognized as a good playwright. And then, like 1,000 kilometers away, he found other people pirated his work and put somebody else's name on it and printed and circulated. So he got into a long-lasting legal court battle against the others, and that was why he started his printing business, and he started to try to make a good living out of that printing business to support his family at a growing size. Because not only he had his wife, he had quite a few, I guess, mistress or concubine that in his household. And that, I believe, I don't recall the exact number, but it was somewhere around a couple of dozen, people in his household that he had support. So the printing business did not provide the whole sufficient economic means and he needed to do more. So he was fortunate because he was right in the middle of the best regional economy throughout the entire China. So there were a lot of merchants, basically floating around with their shining new panties, and they wanted to look up to the Chinese elite and want to just look like them, close enough, or at least as close as possible. And let me talk a little bit about the Chinese social or sociological structure in old times. Below the royalties, there were the nobilities, right? So the royalties and nobilities only exist within the same empire. In the next empire, that part is all going to be gone. And then there's this, uniquely and distinguished social group of the Chinese elite or Chinese gentlemen. And below that, you have the farmers, and below the farmer, you have the tradesmen, like silversmiths, goldsmiths, blacksmiths, whatever the tradesmen. And then below the tradesmen were the merchants. And there were two kinds of merchants back then. One, the licensed merchants that you actually practice your sales in the designated spot where you have a store. And the other merchant, you can call it mobile merchant, they did not necessarily have the license, but they do things, they sell things while they travel, okay? So with the printing shop, Li found himself at the bottom of the society, basically, above his merchant status. They were tradesmen or craftsmen, and then above the tradesmen or craftsmen, there were farmers. So he was 2 layers away from Chinese elites. Well, apparently there were a lot of fellow merchants who had a hell lot more money than Li did, and they wanted to look, elegant. And to look elegant back then, you got to copy what the Chinese elites did back then. So basically, lots of cupolas to be placed, outside, inside your house, even outside your the gate of your yard. And then, what kind of paintings? Obviously, these merchants, they don't do the paintings or calligraphy themselves, and they were so poor, all they had was money. So they needed help, and this is where Li came in handy. He did not pass or even try to pass the second or the third level of exam, but he did pass the first one. That means he did have some education, so he was not illiterate, he was literate, and he was pretty smart. So he, because, with his own, the convenience of his own printing shop, he actually published quite some books, introducing or advising on how to decorate a house, or how to choose the furnitures and how to lay out, how to, put what next to the window, and what the shade, and the design of the window should be, whether that is a house or a secondary residence, a corridor. Even his advice went all the way to how to select a woman for a concubine. Apparently, he has certain taste, and he considered himself as a man of very particular taste, and we're talking acquired taste. So he acquired his own taste. He actually advised on the cuisine, how to prepare, how to present, and all that. So who would need all this? Obviously not the Chinese elites, but those merchants who wanted to look like, close enough, of those Chinese elites. So this is where Li came in. So he traveled extensively, tens of thousands of households, just to solicit the business that he could offer his, let's say, consulting service. And that provided quite a supplement income for him. So while doing all that, obviously he came into contact from time to time with certain Chinese elite, and they apparently were nice enough to him in the region of the south of China, the economy booming place. And then that encouraged him. So he moved to Beijing, the capital city of the Manchurian Empire, where, to his surprise, the Chinese elite always, clearly maintained a distance from him, because he was not part of the circle and people did not want to really social with him. So he tried probably about 10 years or so and he failed. And then after that, he moved back to his, own region, and he eventually died in poverty. Very sad story, okay? And then the other one, Ron, did not have a better ending than this one. Ron was completely rejected by his fellow Chinese gentlemen, and when eventually he got the power that he engineered and prevailed, he became the most powerful man, below the last emperor of Ming Dynasty. He did his revenge on those younger Chinese elites earlier expelled him from the South capital. But then when the Manchurian army or the cavalries arrived, he capitulated and he basically presented the new capital city or the South capital to the Manchurian military occupying forces. And nevertheless, that just completed his political life, and people, of course, spit on his graveyard for what he did, because once the most powerful man in the late or the last dynasty, of Ming Empire, he was volunteering himself as a guide, not a tour guide, but basically led the way for the Manchurian cavalries, to march further down south. But he died on the way, with no dignity, no respect from anyone, because the Manchurians never had a respect for those who, turned. Because the Manchurian believe you can turn once, you will turn twice, 3 times, just for the right price, at the right time, in the right place. So nobody had respect for him, and he died, alone, miserably. So both of them acquired the top reputation as playwright, but both of them died pretty sad at the end of their life story. And this was, I guess, the point I tried to raise in my project in this opera, right? So both of them, their ultimate, I guess, desire was to become recognized by the Chinese elite circle, and they both failed. Whereas they did survive beyond their own lives as the best playwrights. That's pretty sarcastic if you think about it, isn't it? I'll leave that for you guys to chew on or entertain. Until the next session, ciao.